Number 10. The Siblings I Never Had. WWE star Seth Rollins is often in the news for big-name heavyweight fights with fellow stars like Brock Lesnar. He's known for winning such events as the Royal Rumble and holding the WWE Universal Champion title. But in 2019, Beast Slayer was in the news for something much different than wrestling. Rollins posted on his Twitter that, in a wild turn of events, he found out he had a sister and brother he never knew about, and the discovery was made through the DNA directory of 23andMe. The post also carried wholesome images of Rollins smiling alongside his new brother, Colby Lopez. We're guessing the discovery must have been even more shocking for Lopez. Imagine randomly finding out you have a brother who happens to be a WWE star. The 33-year-old fighter followed up his post a month later with an image of him meeting his new sister as well, Beth. He added in the post that it was actually Beth who made the discovery of their lineage using 23andMe. We imagine Rollins must have been skeptical, to say the least. After all, celebrities have been known to face cases of random people coming forward and claiming to be related to them in some form or another. Usually these people carry ulterior motives, such as wanting to cash in on the celebrity's wealth. But when it comes to the Rollins siblings' discovery, the truth can easily be uncovered since DNA doesn't lie. Number 9. The Kidnapping. Sherry Papini is a mom from California that disappeared in 2016. Her case garnered a nationwide search for the Reading woman that vanished while jogging. Only her phone and earphones were found on the side of the road. A few weeks into the search, a woman in chains was picked up by a driver about 150 miles, or just under 240 kilometers from Papini's home. It was Papini herself. She had her hair cut short and was covered in bruises, and she had claimed that she had been released by 2 armed women that kidnapped her. The police stated that Papini had been branded, while other details of the case were hazy at the time. Developments came out a year later as authorities released sketches of the 2 unknown women described by Papini. It was revealed that Papini had been in touch with a male acquaintance of hers shortly before her disappearance. Along with this, there was male DNA found on her clothing, which made the situation even more confusing. Fast forward 4 years later after the initial incident, and the investigators on the case concluded Papini made the whole kidnapping story up. She had given herself bruises and was actually staying with a former boyfriend of hers in Southern California. She was heavily criticized for wasting federal resources for years, which could have otherwise been focused on the real crimes that needed attention. Papini, however, did not retract her story when she was notified of the conclusion reached by investigators in 2020, and instead continued to make false statements about her supposed abductors, as well as denying her ex-boyfriend's involvement altogether. She eventually had her day in court and was arrested in March 2022 on charges of lying to federal authorities and mail fraud. She's also facing charges in connection with $30,000 she received through the California Victim Compensation Board. The false statement charge on its own carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison, while the mail fraud charge can lead to a sentence of up to 20 years in prison. All that for one big lie. Number 8. The Long-Lost Twin. Chang Kiki and Zhang Li are 2 women that found one another on TikTok and think they are long-lost twins that were given up for adoption 30 years ago. Both women belong to the central Chinese province of Henan and found out about each other after a chance encounter on the social media platform back in January 2021. Their discovery had sent shockwaves within our families, who had not told the girls they had been adopted as infants. Chang, who was the less active of the 2 on TikTok, said she had messaged Zhang to ask her parents how many daughters they had had. She was first ignored as a possible scammer, but later persuaded Zhang to chat by sending her a selfie proving just how big the resemblance was. Chang then traveled 30 miles or 48 kilometers south to the city of Dengfeng in order to meet Zhang for the first time in March 2021. Their meeting left both convinced that they were twin sisters since they share the same birthday, blood type, physique, and even birthmark. Chang and Zhang have expressed that they come from happy families and were now even married with their own children, and they did not plan to abandon any of their relations, whether they be blood or not. The alleged sisters plan to take a DNA test to confirm their biological relation, but only with their parents' blessing. Number 7. The Golden State Killer. The infamous Golden State Killer was apprehended in 2018, more than 30 years after a spree of assaults and murders that killed 13 people and left 50 more sexually assaulted. The Golden State Killer was known as the original Night Stalker and the Visalia Ransacker during his crime spree. It wasn't until 2001 that DNA evidence was used to prove both of those perpetrators were actually the same person who had committed crimes throughout the 70s and 80s. In 2018, law enforcement took an unusual step by searching a genealogy website for a match to the DNA they had on file. They were able to score some partial matches by using databases of genetic material supplied by people who were only interested in learning about their family history. That meant the services were used by people who were genetically connected to the murderer themselves. A 1,000-person family tree was created to help identify the possible suspect. The tree was then pruned by removing people who were either too young or lived in the wrong part of the world at the time of their deaths. After a while, only one name remained on that list: Joseph James D'Angelo. The former cop was apprehended and charged with the murders. He pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty, and the Golden State Killer was sentenced to life in prison at the old age of 70. Do you think justice was served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like what you see so far, be sure to subscribe for more content. Number 6. The death of Helene Prusinski. Helene Prusinski disappeared in January 1980. It's believed that she vanished on her way to a bus stop. Her body was found soon after in a field, where she'd been sexually assaulted and brutally murdered with a knife. Many leads were not followed up on by authorities during the investigation, and no one was ever arrested for the crime. Decades later, Jessie Still, like many other people, used the site 23andMe in 2018 to learn more about her family tree. What she couldn't have realized at the time was that she was inadvertently informing authorities about what happened to Helene Prusinski 40 years earlier. Law enforcement was alerted about Still's DNA, some of which was shared with the genetic material on file for the homicide. Of course, it's not Still's herself, but one of her family members. Still was revealed to be Helen Prusinski's killer's cousin. Still, ironically, donated her DNA to the site because she was a true crime buff who was interested in the case of the Golden State Killer. She was aware that the killer had been apprehended thanks to DNA obtained from a genealogy website and wanted to upload her own in the hope that it would be useful to someone one day. Little did she know that just 2 months later, she was contacted by law enforcement about a possible link to the murderer. With Still's assistance, law enforcement created a family tree and discovered James Clinton to be the murderer. He was a relative Still had no idea she even had. Number 5. The Cobb County Rapist. A series of 3 unsolved assaults went down in Cobb County, Georgia in 1999. Although the authorities were able to collect DNA from the crimes, there was no match in their criminal database to identify a suspect. Law enforcement turned to Parabon Nanolabs, a business that specializes in DNA phenotyping, which can help law enforcement solve crimes. Phenotyping is the ability to predict the appearance of anything based on genetic markers, allowing the corporation to essentially study DNA and predict how a suspect might look. It can't provide a perfect image of the individual, but it can give information for hair color, eye color, and skin color. And when you add in DNA genealogy data, you have a very powerful tool for potentially catching serial killers. With the assistance of Parabon, law enforcement was able to find the killer's distant ancestor on the website GED Match. They were able to narrow the field down to a suspect in the assault cases thanks to this. Police discovered a suspect with a criminal history of burglary and being a peeping Tom, and they compared the DNA samples from the suspect and determined that he was, in fact, the man that they were looking for. Number 4. The Chameleon. Curtis Kimball is a serial killer. Larry Vanner and Gordon Jensen are too. But here's one thing. They're all the same person, and despite previously pleading no contest, which basically means guilty, to second-degree murder, Kimball famously revealed at a pretrial hearing in 2003 that he had in fact murdered Yunsen Jun. Kimball, whose actual name is Terry Peter Rasmussen, had previously done time in prison for child abandonment and other petty crimes. Nobody knew at the time that he had a slew of aliases and had been a serial killer for years, taking the lives of innocent women and children. As a result, law enforcement dubbed him the Chameleon. Police were able to link the person who abandoned a 5-year-old girl in the 1980s to the murder of Yunsen Jun, determining that Kimball, Vanner, and Jensen were all one man. They didn't know he was Terry Peter Rasmussen at the time, and they wouldn't for another decade. Police finally discovered Rasmussen was not the father of Lisa, the daughter he was arrested for leaving in the 1980s when they did a paternity test. Curtis Kimball, the guy he claimed to be, just simply did not exist before his arrest. The authorities asked the girl, now in her 20s, to upload her DNA to Ancestry.com and 23andMe. The data revealed some distant cousins, and they used the information to create a family tree. They were able to locate the girl's grandfather, whose own daughter had gone missing a long time before. That daughter turned out to be Lisa's mother. The grandfather last saw his granddaughter in 1981 when she left with her mother and mother's boyfriend, a man named Bob Evans. Rasmussen, of course, was Evans, just another name in his long string of lies. Police then analyzed the DNA of the 4 bodies discovered in barrels near Bear State Park throughout the years in hopes of finding Lisa's mother, but the DNA sequences did not match. The DNA of one of them did match Bob Evans, though, and he had murdered his own relative. Using his DNA, a new family tree was created, and detectives were able to locate Rasmussen. He was then imprisoned and died in 2010. When Alice Collins Plebeck decided to take a DNA test in 2012, she did it as a joke. The 64-year-old woman who identified as Irish American was shocked to discover her DNA contained a combination of European Jewish, Middle Eastern, and Eastern European traces. Following a family-wide DNA test, she found out that her father was not her grandparents' biological son. Plebeck ultimately got to the bottom of the case when she was 69 after several years of digging. Her father had been sent home with the wrong family at birth. The discovery was made by chance when Collins' first cousin, her father's nephew, whose DNA had not matched, ended up distantly matching with someone new to the 23andMe database. More research revealed that this person's father was born on the same day and in the same hospital as Collins' father. Through Collins and her sister's efforts, as well as a mail-in DNA test, a 100-year-old riddle was solved. Number 2. Double Trouble. In a surprising twist of fate, Lydia Fairchild was not the mother of the children she had given birth to according to a DNA test. When money was tight for this single mother, Fairchild, who had 2 children and another on the way, decided to apply for government aid. Fairchild was told to undergo a DNA test to prove the children were hers in order to be eligible for aid money. The results indicated that she was actually their Anne. Lydia, who was confused, afraid, and accused of fraud, arranged for a government witness to be present for the birth of her 3rd child, and a DNA test was performed on the spot. Fairchild was not a match as the mother of the child she had just given birth to. Finally, scientists discovered that Fairchild was a chimera. She had absorbed her twin while in the womb, and the twin's DNA was showing up in the maternity tests. It sounds crazy, but it's true. Number 1. The church assault. This case of an elderly woman who had been attacked in her church is unique among nearly all situations where genetic testing is being used to track down a suspect. As mentioned earlier, Parabon Nano Labs was, like many others, essential in assisting law enforcement in locating criminals. But what made this case special was the crime itself. This was one of the few occasions where the perpetrator did not sexually assault or murder their victim. Instead, an assault was just being investigated. Police claimed that because the criminal had the potential to commit another crime, they needed to take extreme measures in order to locate them. Parabon employed GED match and a DNA sample recovered at the crime scene. The assailant shattered a window to get inside the church, where he strangled the woman from behind while she played the organ. She went unconscious multiple times and had no idea who it was, but the person left blood on the window that they entered. Although the sample was not in any criminal database, GED match was much more effective. The sample was linked to the suspect's uncle, who led authorities to a cousin who lived near the scene of the crime. The culprit, a 17-year-old high school student, was arrested by police. They had school officials watch him at lunch one day and took a milk carton from his meal after it was thrown away. The DNA from the container was matched to the blood on the window. This case isn't particularly noteworthy in and of itself, but it did send shockwaves across the industry. It was unusual for Parabon to utilize their technology to hunt down someone who had committed an assault rather than a more severe offense. According to GED Match, their database is not supposed to be accessed by law enforcement except in situations of murder, sexual assault, or kidnapping. The CEO ignored his own guidelines and let this one go through, which resulted in a significant reaction, both negative and positive. As a result, GED Match changed their regulations to be considerably stricter regarding how and when law enforcement can access their records. Thanks for watching. Which one of these cases shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.